This is a cool event that we're getting to do. We're kind of showing you our restoration pieces that your patronage helps us do. So it's helping us keep these in the museum and on display for many years. So we really appreciate it. So we have 3 restoration projects that we actually have done. We have the Merchant of Venice over here, the 3 rose pieces, and then 2 portrait pieces right here. For the rose pieces, we actually acquired these in 2023. They were donated by an Agnes Michalka, or Agnieszka Michalka, with a Z. All 3 are painted by her. You can see her signature right at the bottom corner there. They all feature rose to life motifs. They were donated in honor of Marilyn Yakshish, who received them from the SBJST Lodge 88 back in 1985. And we received them last year, and we noticed that they had a few things that needed to be done, and we're hoping to display them throughout the museum. One is currently has a place on our first floor right next to the elevator. And we really the next we have the Croix pieces. They feature a portrait piece and a full-length depiction of Croix, a traditional Croix. They were donated in November of last year by Marcia Vitinha in memory of her late husband, Michael Vitinha. They were both painted by a B. Menchek. So not much is known about the artist itself, but they are signed in the very bottom corner there. Both, like I said, both depict a traditional Czech dress. One of the paintings provides an intricate view of the headdress, and the other one is that full-length Czech dress there. I think they both highlight the intricacies a little bit really well for Czech Croix and how intricate they can get. And then lastly, we have the Merchant of Venice piece. We've had this since 2016. It was donated by Vlasta Catholic, who had it passed down through her family. So her great grandmother actually brought it from the Czech Republic to the US. Later on, we found out that this has quite a history to it. This 19th century painting illustrates one of the scenes of William Shakespeare's play by the same name, Merchant of Venice. The style of the piece incorporates both romanticism and realism, as it portrays realistic and elegant depiction of a portrait between Bassanio and Portia. So remarkably, this piece was hidden in a carpet through the Nazi occupation in Czechoslovakia. Its survival is a testament to the turbulent history in Europe of art looting during that time. As we know, the Nazi regime was responsible for looting over 20% of Europe's fine art, and saw countless pieces confiscated, stored in underground bunkers, and sold through auction markets. After the war, a lot of these pieces were, a portion of these pieces were returned to their original owners, while some of them are still lost to this day. So it's really, it speaks to a lot that we still have it in our, it was still in the same, the original owner's hands, and then it was donated to us. So it's a lot of meaning. So I now turn it over to our 2 restoration artists. We took it over to Bradley Spring to address some concerns we had about each of these pieces.
I'm going to take that from you. This one's already working.
Do you want to pass on? I'll just show screen.
Well, hello. Hi, guys, or good evening, I guess I should say. So my name's Rachel, this is Lauren, and we're both from Bradley's Art and Frame. We're from a frame shop that's inside the Loop in Spring Branch. Not everybody knows about things inside the Loop that live outside the Loop. But I just want to really thank the Czech Center Museum for having us, hosting us, and allowing us the pleasure of restoring and being a part of fixing up these paintings, and the frame especially, because it was in disrepair as well. So Bradley's, that's our little shop. Bradley's has been around since 1970. So altogether, I think everybody that has worked at Bradley's, we have well over 50 years experience, from production to designers to myself. I started when I was 16, and about 16-ish years later, I'm still working there, running things. But we deal with, aside from restoration, we deal with custom framing, memorabilia, we do shadow boxes, a whole medley of things, textile art. Basically, if you want to frame it, we will find a way to do it. That's kind of our MO. So I want to start this with some examples of restoration and what it means, and what some little lingo with restoration before I get into, hey, we did this and XYZ on these pieces, because you might not know what it means. So these are some extreme examples of some pieces that we've restored. Primarily they're paintings, but we have restored things like textiles and paper pieces. So let me show you the first one. So this is an example of a painting that obviously it's been torn. And sometimes some restoration artists would suggest doing a patch, but we would do something that's called lining a canvas, which we did on several of the pieces here tonight that you see. So basically, if there's a tear in the canvas, or it's cracking and separating from its original canvas, then the lining process would be to attach new canvas to the back with a wax kind of heated method. So what the wax does is it pulls through the original canvas and grabs a hold of the pigment and pulls it back to the new canvas, which is kind of a neat process. And then not only is it repaired, the patch, but the entire piece is not going to fall apart anymore. So, and then sometimes there'll be extra canvas material on the sides so we can properly wrap it. And that's something that we'll go into a little bit more as we progress. So the next one that I want to show you, this one's very dramatic. This is an example of a piece that was damaged. It was punctured, and our client took it to another restoration artist who actually passed away mid working on it. Clearly they weren't doing the best job. And so by the time we got it, we ended up basically giving the piece a complete overhaul and doing paint touch-up work and removal. And so that also includes cleaning the canvas, which is something that we'll talk about that we've done on these pieces. We'll talk about cleaning and varnishing, which is a chemical treatment to get all of the grime and smoke and years off of the pieces to bring out a lot of the brightness and detail. So this next one was actually painted by Winston Churchill. And this is an example, another example of something that's really common that happens with artwork that's really old, that's seen the test of time, experienced maybe some water damage, moisture. There's dots, as you can see on the left-hand side, that's called foxing. That typically happens on paper pieces, but in this case, it was a painting on board. So that's another thing that we would clean off with a chemical treatment. And a chemical treatment is very labor intensive, and you do it little sections at a time with a cotton ball even. And the moment that you hit pigment, you stop and you neutralize it. So that's kind of the process when it comes to cleaning canvases. And there's a really dramatic one, the same thing. So I just wanted you to get an idea of when we say line a canvas, what that might mean. and cleaning a canvas, what that looks like. Because you guys get to see the finished product, and I have pictures, or we have pictures of what it looked like before damaged, but you know, the end result is really what matters. Okay, so the Merchant of Venice piece. That's this piece right here, which, as Carlin has told us, has a long history. It's been around World War II, right? It's been hidden. It's been through all kinds of things. I'm sure the stories it could tell. When we originally had this come through the front door, the intention was to restore just the frame itself, because the pieces on the bottom, there were some huge chunks that were taken out, which you can see, especially in the right-hand image. And actually, I myself repaired this frame. And sometimes when we get pieces in like this, you can see evidence that other people have worked on it, kind of like other restoration artists, which we decided we didn't really want to touch on too much. We didn't want to make it look perfect, because to itself, its antiquity is something that helps date its age. And that's nice when you're thinking about provenance, how old a piece is, etc. So we decided to just go through and retouch up the spots that were showing white, that were exposed, that were chipped off, the big chunks of the embellishment that were missing. There were some pieces on the side. In fact, let me show you some more. So there you go. It's a little bit difficult to see in the pictures, but I hope you guys get the gist of how it came in and the condition of it.
Can you point out exactly where they might be missing so that you can see?
Yeah, sure, I can show you. So, right in here, there were a lot of smashed pieces like that. Let's see, here, little small details where it's repeated and then it's missing. Let's see, here's some more white pieces, and it was all along here, which is actually thin hairline cracks on the pieces. And then on that far side, I don't want to stand in the way. So on this side, you can see where, as the frame was built, the nail holes are exposed here and here, things like that. On this side, previous slide, the pieces that were missing down at the bottom. So some big chunks were taken off, they weren't there. So those are all pieces that we fixed. And typically when we do frame repair, what we'll do is, if there are pieces that are missing, we always tell our clients, do you have the pieces that fell off? Bring them into us. So luckily they did have the big chunk pieces. So we were able to re-adhere those, and all of those hairline cracks that I pointed out, we went ahead and I did a glue wash over the entire frame. So that way it's going to prevent the piece from further deteriorating and falling apart. And a lot of these old frames, the underlayer, I mean, it's solid wood and it's carved and molded, but the underlayer is an old kind of like calcium chalky substance. And that is why it deteriorates, it falls apart, because it's kind of organic. And a lot of times there's rabbit skin glue included. And bugs love that. It's soft, moisture just eats away at it. So a lot of factors can contribute aside from just dropping it or having it transported overseas even, right? In this case, I'm sure. So that's kind of what went into repairing this piece. We reattached the missing pieces. I wood filled and sanded and molded all of the cracks and the chipped pieces. And then we used paint to match the antique finish that was already on here. Originally, this frame was probably gold leafed with individual gold leaf pieces. That's why I said I can tell that somebody's worked on it, because there are some missing pieces that have been painted over, and those are the ones that we didn't touch. So at one point, this probably was very like gilded and shining and rococo looking. So then the next bit, I wanted to show you the condition of the painting, because what you can see is it looks next to perfect. I mean, obviously it's an old painting, but it doesn't have any damage. So when I mentioned that when it came through the door, it was mainly for frame repair, they didn't actually have any intention or even know that the painting itself needed some work. That wasn't really on the agenda. And we said, hey, wait a second, let us assess this. This is something that we do all the time. It looks to me like there's some damages. So on the far right slide, that bottom corner, that is this right here. So that's something that we noticed even without taking it out of the frame, that the painting itself was deteriorating and falling through the frame. So we found out later when we took it out of the frame that it had experienced some termite damage to the original stretcher bar, because this is a wrapped canvas over stretcher bar. And the old stretcher bar was actually rubbing up against the painting right here. And that's why you can see that kind of crease. And that was at the top part of the painting right here, which no matter what, there's a little bit of crease, but you can't see it anymore like before, because we put new stretcher bars. So brand new bars that are not worked from weather, from rain, from moisture, and they're not rubbing up against the canvas. Because the whole point when you stretch a canvas is you want that separation so the canvas can breathe and you almost be able to play it like a drum, right? So when we noticed some of this pattern, which is some of the cracking and a circular motion here, and in some other places on the canvas, but kind of that's a little bit of a clue for us that, okay, let's say the paint isn't attached fully to its original canvas. And that's a pretty clear sign too that over time it's going to keep chipping away. So that gorgeous image that survived World War II might not be there for future generations. It might pop off. So that's something that we really like to be transparent about with our clients, and just give them the options of things that can be done to save a piece, or just have them be aware. And that's kind of what our goal was for the museum for these pieces. Because we want them to live on. We want you guys to enjoy them. We want your kids and so on to enjoy these pieces. And they're originals. I mean, this entire room has beautiful art, but they're not originals. These are. Okay, so here you can see a little bit more of the intense damage. So the upper right-hand corner, that's that same bottom corner. And you can really see the termite damage on the stretcher bar. And this, I feel like it's easier if I stand. This right here, there's some damage you can kind of see. And so that was a portion of the canvas that was almost see-through. So after it was lined, that was something that was touched up. And all on the side, you can see how the canvas is tearing. It's actually ripping apart. So that one's particularly bad right here. So when you reline a canvas and you're attaching new canvas material, that material actually goes beyond. So that way, when you re-stretch it, you're not pulling it. It's no longer going to tear. It's safe inside the frame. So that was pretty much the process. After lining it, then it got an overall surface clean, which if you remember the cat and some of the other pieces that I showed you, that gets all of the grime off, all of the dirt. And we go all the way until we hit paint and then we stop. Because sometimes it's just truly not safe. And in this case, it didn't have really nasty yellowing varnish, which that's a good thing, because then it made it more clear, more cleaner, and it was easier for us to clean it. So, and we were lucky because it had one of the original like brass plate that describes the name of the piece, or I think by the artist. But there was some detail that we used to not be able to see that we can see now, which is especially back in here. You can see that this was a grand hall and it went even further back. So just little details like that that were kind of missing because it was so dirty. And then when we fit it back into the frame, what we do is we call a mylar lining of the frame, because wood, paper has acidity and it stains and it burns. You wouldn't think of it, but it does. So that protects it and it won't stick to the frame at all. So someday, if somebody at this museum even decides that they want to reframe it, it'll be perfectly ready to just be moved into a new frame and it's safe. So let me show you, this is the finished product after we were done with it. So that's the new stretcher bar and the new canvas material. And what we do is we put a wash over the new canvas material to seal it and also to give it kind of an aged look that goes with the painting itself. And then obviously it's much more beautiful now. There's no tears in the bottom corner or the edges, particularly the middle picture, you can really see that. And this is the piece you have in front of you. So after this, you guys should come up and really look at the details. And there's the frame, which you can see in front of you, but those are the portions that were chipped off that are back intact. And on the edges, this was the part that was really crushed, and now it's back. So that's the finished piece when we were done with it at our shop. We're particularly proud of that one. So at the end of this entire discussion, we'll open the floor to questions if you guys have any. But moving forward, I want to introduce Lauren. She's one of our designers, and she actually spearheaded this entire, this entire process of restoring these pieces. She worked directly with Carlin, and I think together they made it happen so that way you guys could enjoy them. And she has over 20 years experience in framing. And yeah, I'm gonna let you take over.
Thanks. I'll stand as well. Let's see, can you guys hear me? I'm Lauren Enyart, and I have been in the framing and design industry for close to 25 years. Started as a kid with a job, and I'm an artist. I loved it. It's always an adventure, whether we're doing restoration projects, framing memorabilia. I mean, it's endless creativity. I get paid to play with art. I get paid to interact with history. I mean, how incredible that this piece was hidden from Nazis. I mean, in our world today of, if it's not useful, we throw it away, we get new, especially in Western culture. It's rare to find groups of people who appreciate the history, especially in the arts. So we are very appreciative. We're very thankful to be able to work on these pieces. This was intensive. Carlin brought this in, and I was like, oh, we have work to do. There's a lot going on here, but we're trained to see the little details. So not every piece that we deal with is this intensive. As Rachel stated before, we work with textile restoration projects with those conservators. We work with paper conservators. We do lots of things. And our main goal is preservation, conservation. But again, not every piece that comes in the door is that intensive. So for instance, we have these lovely rose pieces. Brought them in, immediately could tell there's years of dirt, grime, possibly smoke. If you think about it, Carlin said mid-80s, that's 40 years of dirt, grime, environmental influences. The paintings don't have glass on them, so they're exposed. So bringing them in, the first thing we do with anything that is that labor intensive or not as labor intensive is we investigate. We take the pieces, we look at the details, we look at the canvas, we look at the stretcher bars, we look at the original frames. These pieces did not have a hard coat of varnish. It looked immediately like they could be cleaned easily. Now, again, the cleaning process is not necessarily easy. It is a very delicate process. You go very slowly. We're trained to look at those minute details. And what we do is when we clean, we add a chemical, small spaces at a time, testing them first, of course, for the right strength, the proper strength. And then as soon as we hit pigment, we neutralize. So it's definitely kind of an investigative process and a chemistry lesson. And so these pieces came in and they were very grayed. You could see that there were areas of heavy grime, especially on the edging, right, and underneath the frames. As Rachel mentioned before, the wood is acidic. So underneath the frame, the canvas was more brittle and dust, dirt, grime had collected as well. So we took them out of the frames, assessed them, looked at the back. We looked for insect damage. We looked for cracking. We look for warped stretcher bars. A lot of times with old paintings, you'll see them come in and we measure them. We make sure that the stretcher bars are square and are not placing undue stress on the painting, on the canvas. Because as wood warps over time, it pulls in strange directions. And that can cause cracking, that can cause those circular motions that you saw where the paint begins to separate from the canvas. So with everything that comes in, we want to be very careful to really look at all of the details. So these were actually pretty easy to clean. There's not a lot of heavy texture. There was a good deal of dirt and grime. You could not see the vibrant colors of the flowers. But after the cleaning and the varnishing, you can see now more of a depth of color and composition. At first glance, they were pretty pieces, they were pretty roses, but you really couldn't see the shadows and the depth, and especially some of the delicate pieces with the roses and the leaves, and then the different colors in the background. So that was a fairly, I wouldn't say easy, but compared to the Merchant of Venice, it was a lot easier to clean and get those in better shape. The stretcher bars were intact, they weren't warped. There's a lot of things that we have to look at and consider when making sure that we are able to restore the piece to its vibrancy, right? So next one. Now these were a little bit more complicated. These were fun. So again, when these come in the door, it's an investigative process. So what we found beyond the typical grime and the dirt, and we were not really sure how old these are. It's hard to speculate because environmental influences can make a painting that's not as old look very old. It just depends on what the painting has been exposed to. But quickly, we saw that these stretcher bars were okay, but the varnish was uneven. It was one of the first things we noticed. We take them out, we measure, we check the sides, we look at the canvas, and you can see that we can observe areas of cracking and also fraying around the canvas. Again, in older frames, the wood is acidic. The rabbet of the frame, which is what holds the canvas in, was not protected. And so you see a lot of wearing and tearing here at the corners and the edges. You can see that the paint seems to thin out in these areas. And that's why they're exposed, they're underneath the lip of the frame, and after years, they wear and tear. So the canvas becomes brittle. So we take note of that. We take note of any tears, any cracks, any dings. Sometimes you have to be very careful, especially with paintings that have a lot of detail, because you don't want to miss any small, minute cracks, any places missing paint. So you can see the cracks here that we observed. There's also a little bit of paint missing here. So we look over those areas with a fine-tooth comb, often with the aid of lights, magnifying glasses, things like that. We make lists We look at the front, we look at the back. In particular, one of these pieces had gesso painted on the back. Gesso is a substance that preps a canvas for paint. Typically, you don't ever see it because then the paint is applied over the gesso. Well, this artist had gessoed half of one of the portraits. Doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize that adds weight and it adds almost another layer, not of pigment and of paint, but it is of substance. So it's almost doubled on one side, prepped on the back, prepped on the front. And many artists used to paint on both sides of the canvas. And it was up to the patron, or sometimes the artist, or the family to decide which painting was going to be displayed. Well, nothing ever got painted on it, but it was prepped. So half of it was prepped, which was causing some of the cracking, some of the stress in the painting. So you see right here, this lighter area is the gesso. This is the original canvas. Well, looking at the painting, you see these cracking lines and places where pigment is starting to flake off. And part of that is because the paint is being pulled by that weight. It's minute, but it makes a difference after years and years, especially when you add, it's been in a frame, the edges are worn, that causes some stretching, some cracking, and so that definitely needed to be addressed. It was causing cracking in the painting and some uneven portions. So that was one of the things that was an area of concern for us. And you can see toward the edges, the missing pieces of paint, and of course the fraying on the bottom. And it's funny, two paintings, same artist, we assume the same time period, relatively, they can age in very different ways, depending on their environment, depending on how the artist prepared the canvas, and the type of canvas. For instance, the Merchant of Venice, that canvas was relatively thin. You saw the insect damage, you saw the holes. These canvases were a little bit thicker. So as the paint cracks and the gesso pulls, you start to see those deep rivets. So when we go to line a canvas, that's one of the things that we consider, is how thick is the original canvas and what kind of canvas needs to come to support the back of it. If you've got a very thick canvas, you don't necessarily need a very thick lining canvas to go on top of it. So on these pieces, we used a thinner canvas to line the back, to support. So another thing we look at is the inconsistent varnish. These pieces actually had more varnish and it was in different places. So for instance, with the roses, when we evaluated those pieces, you could see the dust and grime, and some areas were dirtier than others, but the dirt looks different than varnish. So again, we're investigators. We look at minute details, and it really is kind of an exploration. It's like a treasure hunt to find all that we can do to make these pieces come back to life, to preserve them, and to bring back their original vibrancy. So here you can see the shiny parts and then the dull, the more matte section. The varnish was applied inconsistently. In some places, like the face and the white collar, it had even more varnish than the rest of the painting. The edges had very little. The face and some of the detail parts of the piece had more. So let me step over here and show you. Over here, the face. here the collar, the face. Some of these more detailed sections had more varnish. And sometimes an artist will do that to provide an extra layer of protection. However, over time, varnish can turn into a hard-like resin substance. It's very difficult to remove. It's a very tedious, careful, minute process. We have to go very slowly, and again, it's finding the correct mix of chemicals and having the neutralizer ready, doing little test spots to make sure that we have the correct strength, that we're taking off varnish, that we're taking off dirt when we clean, and not pigment. Now, occasionally, you'll get into the varnish, you'll get a great deal of it off, but then it begins to lift pigment with it. And at that point, you have to neutralize and stop so that you save the original pigment and you don't go into that. So here, you can see more of the inconsistent varnish coupled with the dirt and the grime. So we've got two problems that we need to address, and that makes these a little more tricky, especially when you're dealing with faces and the details in the collar and the headpiece. So you want to be very careful when it's faces, when it's very detailed pieces, because once pigment is missing, it's missing. So it's a very delicate process. So those are some of the things we look at. I have so much information in my head. This is so much fun to, I mean, we could talk to you for hours. It truly is like a treasure. So we look at the length of the canvas. We look at the different cracking. You see here? Some of that varnish contributed to some of the instability here. Also, one of these canvases had more canvas than the other. So we take that into consideration, and that's why when we line a canvas, we have extra canvas. So we're not pulling on the original, we're pulling on the source of strength for the piece. We're binding it to a new piece of canvas so that we can get it back on the stretcher bar, cleaned, varnished, intact. So some of the things that we look at, let's see, I think we'll close, let's see. We talked about the delicate areas of the painting, so you can see after they've been restored, there's a lot of dirt and grime, especially on the white pieces, the sleeves, the headdress. You can see the individual beading now, and then the faces. We wanted to preserve the integrity of the artist's delicate strokes around the faces, the details of the beads, and the lace, the collars. So it's tricky business, but it's fun. Let's see. So here is an example of the lining. So we peeled back just a little bit of a layer, the far piece at the bottom, to show that, I'm going to step in front here for a minute. This is the old canvas, this is the new. And then this is the conservation tape that just protects the edges. So we bind that to a thinner canvas because that canvas is already thick. You can see how much thicker it is than the canvas we use to line it. So that's wrapped back around the stretcher. The stretchers were intact, they were cleaned. And then on the back, we evened out the one piece that had the gesso so that there's the same pressure against the original canvas, instead of having half of the canvas a little bit heavier. And to pick it up and to handle it, you might not even notice it, but it does profoundly affect the way that the paint lays and the way that the paint ages, and it pulls up. So it almost accelerates that deterioration. So that's part of the reason that lining is so important. So we clean the bars, we seal them with a wash, and they're ready to go. We use the original frames, we clean those up, and we try to use the original materials and, preserve as much of the integrity as possible. Again, when we're cleaning places, we would rather have a little bit of varnish left over rather than take pigment from the original painting. So it's a tricky process, but it's fun. It's an investigation. Every painting, every textile, every paper that we take in that needs work, that has foxing or whatnot, they're all different. They're all different. Even these two pieces that were painted, we assume, at similar times, same artist, were very different when it came to doing the restoration work and the investigation and what we found. One had more cracking due to the gesso. One had more fraying at the edges, and the canvas was tearing due to the length of the canvas. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at, and it's our pleasure to be able to do that for you so that you get to enjoy these for many, many years to come. Ultimately, our goal is conservation and preservation and appreciation. We love art. That's why we do what we do. That's why we've been in this business for years and years. Our production crew has the same amount of passion, many, many years of service to the arts. A lot of us are artists, so we deeply appreciate your trust in us to bring you these magnificent pieces. Restored, cleaned, beautiful, and for your viewing pleasure. So thank you for trusting us. We're going to open things up to questions. I know. I think mine is a lot more temperamental. I hope you guys can hear me.
So we didn't know if you guys had any questions for us. Oh, there's already some. Do you wanna?
I just have a couple of questions, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
On that frame, the frame is beautiful.
Oh, it is. It's incredible.
It's stunning.
Yes, and I was wondering if the material that was used to make the frame was plaster of Paris. It's not wood.
Well,
Part of it is wood.
It's both, I would say. But a long time ago, the plaster was more like a chalky. It's also kind of called gesso, even though we were referencing
Yes,
gesso.
but it's plaster of Paris, it's gypsum.
Yes, and it just crumbles away. If it gets wet, it crumbles.
Yeah. And the second question is maintenance. What is to be done with the paintings afterwards? I mean, how does a museum keep the piece intact? Or what kind of,
Well, you're ahead of the game having it in a museum setting. It's climate controlled. It's not in an attic. It's not collecting dirt and grime and smoke. So environment is incredibly important. To have the pieces restored to the best of our ability without taking any pigment off, and the protective layer on the back and the varnish in front should last for many, many years to come, especially in great
varnish iron piece sealable as well. So that's kind of why that goes along with cleaning it. So if any piece is touched by a restoration artist, before they even touch it, they're gonna varnish it. So it's sealed. So even any piece in a museum, if somebody's touched it up, it's been varnished before. So that way, if somebody wants to go through and get rid of whatever that restoration artist did, they can clean that off and it won't hit the original paint, it'll hit varnish. Right? So then if it needs to be cleaned again, like let's say 50 years from now, the pieces that we've restored and we varnished, they can clean it down and hit our layer of varnish before they hit the original paint. which is kind of a fun thing. So then it can almost be cleaned infinitely that way when you're sealing it. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You just can clean the dirt and the varnish can stay, or you clean with the varnish?
You can clean the dirt and to the varnish. But the varnish could yellow, like what we saw on those portraits. That nasty yellowing around the eyes, the nose, the chin, like all of that. And then that would be taken off, but then it would be sealed again. So something else, these are all paintings, but if it's other pieces for maintenance, let's say in your homes or in a museum, and they're paper, they're textile, we use acid-free materials now, like paper acid-free materials, ragboard, that's what's called, or UV protected glass, which a lot of people think, oh, it's my piece is in front of a window. Well, any lights, like even a light in your home causes UV damage, fading. And we see that a lot, all the time, pieces coming in. Matted pieces that have regular glass without that UV coated material, and then we take it all apart, and underneath the mat, you see the real color. Yeah, the true color of what it was, the real beauty of it.
And I deal with a lot of sports memorabilia, and so I will get pieces in where they want to match something, and a good way to look at any autographs that are framed or even family photos, look at them. You won't notice the fading so much if you see it every day, but when they bring me new autographs and say, please match this design, here's a piece I bought at auction 3 years ago. I just had this happen. And here's a new piece, a new jersey with new photos that I want the same design. Okay, so we design it, we put it next to each other. There's a huge difference because this piece bought at auction didn't have UV glass. So the frames, they held everything together perfectly. The design was amazing. The jersey's intact. However, the photographs and the mats are faded. And when you look at it every day, you don't necessarily notice it. But when you see it against something new, you see how dramatic. And my client said, well, this has just been in my home. Yes. But it doesn't have to be sunlight. It doesn't have to be direct sunlight or even natural light filtering through the window. Our lights that we use in our homes, they affect our artwork. So varnishing paintings is another layer of protection, not just against dirt and grime, but against those factors as well.
Yes, ma'am.
How many years?
So, I think that would matter, or a contributing factor would be, where is it gonna go once it's restored? Right? Is it gonna be in a home?
My home.
In your home, okay. So no factors of moisture, it's in an attic heat, anything like that. In the right condition, I mean,
Hundreds.
hundreds of years.
Yes.
A long time. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying like in 20 years, oh, we need to do it again. That's not the case.
No,
That's not the case.
I can't judge it. Because
Oh, wow.
That's amazing that you have them.
And I have a store next to it before I moved up here.
Mhm.
And some of them I didn't have the store that's we didn't have any damage.
Right,
But, who knows?
right.
But
Well, it's worth having them get looked at,
Yes.
just to see,
yeah, just
you know? And then somebody like us can say, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. Or we're like, oh no, these are some areas of concern, like Lauren was saying, we're kind of investigating all of the areas.
And that's a service that we
Yeah.
provide. If you had something that you were concerned about, it's a free consultation. You bring them in, you have them, us look at them, and we can go over the details together. Something from the early 1900s, yes, that's 100 years old. So definitely, we want to make sure that and sometimes you find that all you need is a cleaning, an updated varnish, and to line the frame to protect them. I mean, it's not always a huge, complicated situation.
Just update with the right materials, just to make sure.
Absolutely.
Acid-free materials in the shop. That's
And-
mainly.
Acid-free materials have been around for how long?
Honestly, not that long,
That
yeah.
long.
Not that long. So if something were like even a paper piece, you had it framed in the 80s, it's worth taking it to your local frame shop to have it looked at.
Because the technology has gotten so much better just in the past.
I mean, I don't think there were
10, 15
acid-free
years.
masks, there was not UV glass.
No,
So some of the things that we have now didn't exist. And even, that's not to say, I mean, so in general, paintings, you don't need to put glass over them. But there have been some really ancient paintings or very collectible paintings, like the Winston Churchill piece I showed you, where we went ahead and we'll put glass over it, or acrylic, because that's shatterproof. Just to have an extra layer of protection against all the grime and natural stuff that happens in life. Because I mean, dust happens.
well, and people happen,
Yep, people happen.
people happen. So sometimes you have to protect it from the people.
Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
I have a question. Concerning the margin of Venice, you said that there was paint missing. Who does the restoration of that paint?
So we,
I mean, there was a,
that kind of scratch,
yes,
right? So we do paint restoration in-house, and then we also work with a restoration artist. So it depends if we need something that's like that extra tier level of expertise, then we'll contact a restoration artist or a conservation artist that we partner with.
the other one is just curiosity.
Yeah.
What is the oldest painting you have restored?
The oldest.
We were going through pictures preparing for this and looking at all just the different, well, what about the boats?
I mean, I feel like paper pieces are some of the oldest that we've ever
Oldest.
dealt with. I mean, we've
Yes.
had a document signed by Abraham Lincoln.
Well,
I mean, just collectors, you know? So I can't even say, that's probably one of the oldest paper pieces. Which you wouldn't think that paper would outlast a painting, but that's one of the oldest I think that we've ever dealt with. Yes.
When you mentioned the lining the canvas, is the wax the only thing that attaches the original canvas to the new canvas?
Yes.
Yes, that's it.
Yep.
And that's strong enough to be able to hold it together. And then you need to.
And it literally pulls through. I mean, you know, because wax seeps into the pores, and canvas, especially old canvas, I mean, it's linen. So it makes it really strong.
And then,
And it's weighted. So when we do that process, it's with, you know, you heat it up, you apply it, and we have to weight it until it solidifies.
It's basically almost creates like a sandwich effect between the older canvas and the new canvas, right? But that wax creeps in to the older canvas that has the vulnerabilities and has places where, you know, maybe the paint is more vulnerable in certain areas, and it does reach up and grab all of that pigment as well. So it's a safe and incredibly secure way to bind those two pieces together and create strength where, like, there were pieces of the Merchant of Venice that were just very brittle. I mean, just hanging on the edges. Remember that
Especially
bottom
the
edge
termite.
was just termite damage, insect damage. There were pieces that were just hanging on. And with the lining of the canvas creates an incredible amount of strength for that.
do you have to use a certain amount of heat when you want to get that wax and whatever, a certain degree?
Basically, it's almost like a little crock pot full of wax. And once it heats up to a certain temperature, it's just basically like soup. And then you lather it on. It needs to be hot enough to where it will not,
Deal with it.
it needs to be hot enough to where it won't harden right away. Because I mean, have you ever poured out candle wax and then it hardens? So it needs to be hot enough to where you can quickly spread it out and wait it before it hardens right away.
And then one other question. How do you know when to stop before you hit pigment when you're cleaning?
So basically, the moment that you see pigment, you need to neutralize it and stop.
Because the cleaning process is not big swatches. It's minute little areas at a time, especially in very delicate old pieces and delicate areas. So the moment that you see pigment, you neutralize it, it's done.
So
And
you
there's-
can tell that it's from varnish.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And there's also different strengths of chemical that can be used. So sometimes on really old pieces, I mean, well, not sometimes, always, you start with the least strong and work your way up. You might not even need to go to that really intense strength chemical at all.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes.
Could you explain in Reader's Digest terms how to remove foxing from paper?
How to remove foxing from paper. Depends on how bad the foxing is and what the paper is attached to. If it's attached to a board that has inherent problems that will keep reoccurring, it's going to be problematic. So the most important first step is, and we just got a piece in that is a watercolor with extensive foxing and fading mounted to about a 1/4 inch thick board. And if you look at the back of the board, there's mold. There's evidence of mold. Now, someone worked on it previously and we were told the mold is contained. Well, the mold can come back. Mold spores can come back given in the right environment. So,
And there is a trick with some molds too.
Mhm.
You can, if it's like a family picture, small picture, you can freeze it. If it's a print, like you literally can freeze the mold. If it's a print piece that has foxing, you can do a kind of an old method of sterilizing and you can put it in the sun. But you don't want to leave it too long because you don't want it sun damage. But ultimately, it's like what Lauren is saying. You want to get it out of the frame or whatever, however it is stored right now, and assess and see, okay, is there moisture that's been collecting in the frame? Is it not acid-free materials that are causing the foxing? What's causing the foxing?
How about Harvey?
Harvey, we've done Harvey pieces.
lots.
And honestly, if it's family portraits, you can't remove, like photographs, for instance, then I would say work with a photo lab, have them digitally restore it and make new prints.
I brought
You brought it? Well, we can see it.
We would love
We
to
can
look
see
at it.
it.
Yes.
But if it's a paper piece that is not like digital photograph, then definitely a paper conservator.
No, I wasn't sure what the program was gonna be tonight.
Oh, we're easy.
Yeah, we
You
can look
just-
at it.
Absolutely.
We'll certainly look at it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. Let's see.
Oh, goodness. So we would definitely want to get it off this board. I don't see evidence of tissue.
So basically, a piece like this, if it's original, means the world to you, or it has value, then I would take pictures of it and send it to a paper conservator and see if they can work with it. Because they're trained professionals with paper, and they give it a bath, that's what it's called, bath, and they use different chemical treatments that we don't do in-house. Because paper's so temperamental. Yeah. But if not, then photolab can be copied and Photoshop and digitally restored. If you like that, if you want the original, then that would be the suggestion.
But it's definitely worth having, it's always worth having someone assess it. Absolutely, because the board that it was mounted on originally is not an acid-free board. So that's causing a problem right there because there's acid inherent in this paper, in this board, that will cause discoloration. On top of that, you're dealing with temperature, mold, right?
Harvey mold.
Harvey mold.
That's a different
With-
beastie unto
with
itself.
kind of- Yes,
100%.
there's a whole different thing. Definitely, I would get it assessed by a paper consultant.
So if you want to come by and see us,
Yeah, please do.
and we'll help.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you did the right thing in taking it out of the frame if it was.
Yes.
You would have just gotten worse.
To have it isolated, and always, if you have something like that and it's under glass and you see that spotting, especially if the glass is looking cloudy and you think maybe you're seeing those spots in the glass as well, have someone get it out of that frame.
We paid her to bring a prop. I'm just.
Have someone get it out of the frame. And you can always bring it to us and we'll get it out for you. We'll get it out for you, we'll isolate the piece and give you some recommendations. But we work with some really fantastic people, and if we can't do it in-house, then we can absolutely point you in the right direction, for sure.
Guys, is that it? Any more questions, people?
Sure.
Oh, one more question.
So this is my thing too. Is there like a lot of drawing on it?
The Merchant of Venice piece?
Yeah,
Yeah.
was there like a lot of drawing?
I mean, the entire top and side, all of that detail, you couldn't
couldn't
really
see.
see before. Did you see it before?
This was like a while ago. I just grew up with this.
Really? Oh, that's
so cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, especially like the folds
Yeah.
in the fabric over here. If you get up close, there's some highlights in the folds in the fabric.
Is this
The
your first time
statue
seeing
right
it
here?
after?
This over here.
But after the restoration? Yeah. Oh, cool. That's so special.
These curtains and this column kind of just disappear into this curtain. So this area up here, the shadows back here and the arches, I mean, it just,
I noticed the background more now.
yes.
And if you want,
There's more
I can
depth.
re-show you some of the pictures of when we took it out of the frame, where it was like falling apart.
So yeah,
Yeah, I'll show you afterwards. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, so if you guys want to take a look, closer look at all the pieces, or if you have any personal questions about your pieces at home, or any more questions about restoration in general, thank you so much for coming and supporting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.